Matt, I'm so excited to be here, man. I know we've been chatting for a long time. It's been a work in progress, and you guys have been moving and shaking, new company, so much happening. But tell us who you are and what you do here, man.
My name is Matt Vermunt. I'm proudly the Director of Residential Development here at ATCO. Under Land and Development, under the ATCO umbrella is Land and Development, and owned by Land and Development is Viva Homes, which is ATCO's foray into permanent urban modular development.
Yeah, before we get into the ATCO story, obviously visionary pioneer family, Nancy, under the leadership of even Christy, who's an incredible human being that's also had an incredible vision. But let's talk a little bit about you, Matt. I know you've been in the affordable housing space for quite some time. Tell us a bit about your experience and what you were doing in your career prior to coming here.
Yeah, I've spent my development career in the city of Calgary. I'm a born and raised Calgary boy, so love the city and love this sector of work. I spent nearly 14 years working at Home Space Society, which is a not-for-profit developer in Calgary, which did some really cool stuff. It chauffeured a number of projects through a Resolve campaign a number of years ago, which was a collaborative fundraising campaign, which saw some of the biggest builders in the city contribute and knock out projects in conjunction with Home Space. We did some cool things like an office to residential conversion. We did, I think, one of the first in Calgary behind one or two others, but that was a pretty innovative product and development. And we did everything from assisted, permanent, supported living, 4-story developments right down to stacked townhomes, all conventionally built. But very excited after 14 years there to be at ATCO.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Like, I think Home Space, under the leadership and with your guys' team, had been pioneering the way in so many different ways. Like you talked about the breadth and diversity of products, office conversion, stacked towns, 4-story mid-rise.
Yeah.
One thing I always admired about Home Space is their ability to engage with the private sector, which oftentimes doesn't happen enough. And you talked a little bit about Resolve. Why do you think Home Space was so successful at kind of like pioneering and innovating and pushing through some of the noise to be able to do that?
It was a culmination of a few things. It was well timed. The government of Alberta, call it approaching 20 years ago now, there was a big grant push out of the government of Alberta. So Home Space, the Calgary Homeless Foundation at the time, found themselves with tens of millions of dollars of provincial grants. At that same time, Alan Norris of Brookfield tapped his friends on the shoulders. You can think of some of the biggest developers in the city of Calgary to each step up and participate and execute a project and make a donation to the project, which they did. Those were 11 builders and 11 projects in Calgary. The combination of like the kindling, which was those tens of millions of dollars worth of capital grants sitting there, partnered with the Resolve campaign and all those builders, was really sort of the spark that got the Homeless Foundation and then Home Space going at the time to knocking out projects after projects. And we really got going, really got momentum to the point where I can remember, I think, having 5 developments rolling at a time, which isn't anything huge for a group, maybe like a Truman or some big developers in the city of Calgary, but for not-for-profit development, that's really knocking them out at the time. It was highly successful, got a ton of units in the ground. What was also cool was, the city of Calgary was really part of that as well too. We helped pioneer, which is now just a program and a process, but the affordable housing land transfer, that never existed. Home Space was the first recipient of a number of chunks of land before that process was even formalized and became a thing. Home Space was also there really working alongside of the city with things, the development of like the housing incentive program and rebate programs, and then just simply down to just pushing to have affordable files prioritized and in the system and looked at and pushed out the door first.
Yeah, I mean, those catalytic moments are critical, and it's obviously set the foundation up in a way that they've continued to deliver under the leadership of Bernadette. And it's so interesting to hear you even kind of socialize how important it was to have all of those key players step up at the right time, and then to see the transformation happen. And so, yeah, like I said, I've always been a big fan of that, and super glad that you were able to impact that in a meaningful way.
Yeah, it was cool, and whether or not it was co-investment funding or rapid housing initiative came along at the time of COVID, which fueled that office to residential conversion. It was kind of right time, right place, but for sure, it was an alignment of the stars, and an alignment of stars that has to happen again from funding to some assistance from the city and a bit of certainty on approvals and process and expediting that process. That all worked together, and I think that was like a shining example of public-private partnership, a city getting invested in the movement as well. And after a number of years, it resulted in a number of buildings throughout the city of Calgary that's doing some great work for people that need it.
Yeah, cool, man. Well, so, now all those years later, you find yourself at the pinnacle of this moment, and, you start having conversations with Christy, and
Yes.
she talks to you a bit about the vision. And I think like you, like all of us, we all probably had a little bit of skepticism of whether or not modular was really here. Like, we've heard it was here, and there's no better company in my mind than ATCO to tell us it might be here. But what was some of that early days conversations as you were contemplating what that might look like for you?
It's funny to be over here now at ATCO drinking and working the Kool-Aid. And it's certainly a good Kool-Aid, and it's coming. But sitting in my office in home space, it was interesting. It was a closed door in a lot of ways when you've got a lineup of some of Calgary's biggest builders making a donation to a project and acting as construction manager. It closes the door a little bit during that time for other construction managers or partners to get in there. The writing's on the wall that these 11 builders are part of this cause.
Sure.
But we would always build conventionally, like whether it was mid-rise concrete, whether it was 4-story wood frame, whether it was 3-story stacked townhome. We were always building conventionally. We would have a number of modular builders, construction managers, development managers come into our office and push the modular angle. At that point in time, it just didn't always make sense. It seemed a bit risky. It wasn't proven out. It wasn't as commonplace. And it was a common answer from our office at the time that it doesn't necessarily make sense. It hasn't been proven out that it's faster. It's not cheaper. I think modular, now being immersed in this, offers a higher quality product. So there's a number of reasons for that. But at my time at Home Space, working with the builders that we did, we got a lot of knocks on the door. It didn't make sense.
Yeah.
I think what's inherently different now is at that time you'd have people that had a small portion or a sliver of that pie or that whole spectrum of work, from land acquisition and due diligence and upfront planning to construction and occupancies. And you might have a development manager that knows something about modular but doesn't build the boxes, doesn't acquire the land, do the approvals. You might have a modular manufacturer that builds the modular units but doesn't have any experience in land acquisition or other parts of the food chain. I think this is a really, really unique time where for the first time, really, you see an entity with the muscle and the might that an ATCO has, where from A to Z, we own the entire food chain from land and development now. ATCO owns land. We're also actively looking at acquiring parcels of land, which we've done for a second pilot development in Calgary. So from land acquisition, due diligence, municipal approvals, we obviously own the manufacturing, which I can get into. There's been ATCO that's done the good work in Calgary that we've always done, but there's also been some really exciting acquisition of other modular manufacturers over the last couple of years in Canada. And then finally, the construction and logistics experience, which a group like ATCO has been in the business of for 80 years. It's been the first time that front to back entity owns that entire spectrum of work. That was for sure a big carrot that brought me over here, and I feel really, really lucky to be in this position at a really, really good time with some really exciting announcements coming out of levels of government like the feds.
Yeah, super cool. And I mean, like, folks can get lost in the ATCO name because it is such a big organization that touches us in so many different ways, touches consumers, Albertans, Calgarians, North America wide, even further. I know the name has its own divisions, but you guys launched a new division. It's called Viva Homes. That just happened recently. Tell us a bit about what Viva does with specifically, we find ourselves in a unit, which we'll get you to unpack for us a bit, but what does Viva do? What's the goal for Viva and what's the mission?
Okay, and it is ATCO is a juggernaut of an organization. So from the outside, people see ATCO, but there's a lot from ATCO Gas to Energy Systems to ATCO Structures, Frontech operating as far away as Australia, for example. So Viva Homes is it's under the ATCO Land and Development banner. And what ATCO Land and Development focuses on, as you can imagine, ATCO has got a ton of infrastructure throughout the province and all parts of the world. That stuff needs to be maintained, managed. ATCO Land and Development takes care of the properties in Alberta, for example, working with property management groups on the operations of those properties. ATCO Land and Development is also responsible for the 40 or 50 acres out here at ATCO Park. A third prong is Viva Homes, which is just an all-out real estate development company. We're not looking at necessarily building mods for other developers. We're looking at acquiring land, running approvals, getting developments in place. The near-term goal for Viva is to sell turnkey developments to housing providers, REITs. There's been a ton of interest in a bunch of different areas as far as what Viva has up and running.
Yeah, you and I were talking a bit about this off camera because Middle has had the opportunity to work with ATCO as they built out this program, and we got to tour the facilities. And I think for us, it was so exciting to see a development organization of this caliber looking at Middle housing as a potential solution to the housing crisis. I think that's been one of the coolest things for us. And so talk a little bit about the form category and kind of how you guys are visualizing why that form category works, why it's important, and maybe historically where Triple M was or where the production facilities were doing.
Yeah. Again, under that big umbrella, you've got ATCO Structures, which I think is what most people think of. You think of that ATCO trailer with the yellow stripe around it, which has been around since like the 40s. I think that business was started. ATCO Structures will continue to do that great work that they've always done. Workforce housing. If it's the U.S. government that calls and they need a city essentially of 5,000 people to suddenly be erected in the middle of the Nevada desert, ATCO Structures will jump in and do that. If it's one of the world's largest mines in Chile that needs workforce housing, ATCO Structures will do that. They'll continue to do all that great work. They have some really cool projects coming online. Attainable Homes in Calgary has partnered with ATCO Structures on I think it's a 4-story, 84-unit development in downtown Calgary. The mods are in that factory being built right now, and that should come online. They should be running down Crowchild Trail towards that downtown site around Stampede time. So ATCO Structures will continue to do all that exciting work that they've always done and more. Viva Homes will solely focus on the Middle housing, stacked townhome typology, what we're sitting in right now. You mentioned Triple M, which is Western Canada's largest modular manufacturer, has been for quite some time. They've pumped out tens of thousands of units over the decades. ATCO acquired them a little over 3 years ago, seeing that they pump out some beautiful residential product. Triple M has typically deployed that product in sort of cottage, secondary home type situations. I think the goal was looking at the beautiful product that Triple M produces, and if you could put a bit of a twist on it, up the density slightly, and get something like we're sitting in right now, a stacked townhome, that would be the perfect manufacturing facility to start with this permanent residential development, and that's indeed what's happening. So anything Viva related will come directly out of Triple M's manufacturing plant in Lethbridge, Alberta. They'll continue to do the work that they've done in the past, but as steam picks up and Viva catches legs, we intend on more and more of that production capacity out of Triple M to be dedicated to the Viva Homes stacked townhome product.
Very cool. Yeah. So tell us a bit about what we're in, Matt. Like what this form is. Obviously, what are we sitting in here today? And I don't think anyone would call this modular anymore or trailer homes, because it sure doesn't feel like it inside.
Yeah, and I think we've had a ton of friends. Christy has got a ton of friends, a ton of inroads with developers in the city of Calgary, which have done great work. I think Calgary, and in talking to some of these developers that know very well, I think Calgary's got one of the highest residential specs in North America. And that would come from the mouth of a group like Brookfield, who obviously knows residential specs throughout North America. So it's a tough market. We've got a very high quality product here. We were interested to see and get some private developers through the product to take a look at it, and what we've received and the feedback is applause. And I think even as recently as a number of years ago, we've talked about modular always being around and people dipping their toes in it and exploring, but it not really happening at a grand scale. I think a lot of these developers have been keeping their eyes on it, haven't always been satisfied with the product that can be and that would have been produced. I think this is a game changer. We've had a number of those developers through this excited and starting to ask us questions, saying that you guys are there. You've pushed this thing to the point where this is a viable option. We're very, very aware that there's a big bias, which it's funny what success brings. ATCO's so successful in the business that they've done for decades that now you're working to, on this residential level, dispel the trailer sort of bias. But I think anyone can step into this beautiful residential home, and this can be a proud home for anyone. It's not there aren't any constraints on this, like we're working with a thinner type module because it's built in a factory. This is an 18-foot wide module. I had developers through here last week that are working on 15 and 16-foot wide mods. So there's nothing inherently small or trailerish about this. It's all the same residential inputs, from finishes to 2x4 wall construction, drywall. We're just really, really proud and excited to where we've pushed this product.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, our work together and us being able to be on the front lines with you and seeing kind of what the opportunities were, where the constraints were, how do you figure out those constraints, transportation, logistics. And I know you've been dealing with them now as you go live on projects, but I think one of the things that was so exciting for me is like, we mapped out what a typical infill parcel was and said, could we deliver the same units modularly? And you've literally proved that you could.
Yeah.
And I think the thing that I was so excited about is this whole idea of like, can we create multi-generational communities? Can you create aging in place? And essentially that's what you've done. So you got this fully at-grade accessible, light but fully accessible possible unit with a family that can live on top. Talk about how important that was in the makeup of what you're doing.
I think like ATCO certainly is not looking at pumping out developments like a typical prairie or city 50 by 126,000 square foot lot. But what we wanted to demonstrate was this product was certainly nimble enough that if things got dummied down to that level, this product works. Yeah. So this townhome that we're sitting in, it is 2 lower 500 square foot suites with 2 1,000 3-bedroom square foot units above. So a total of 4 units. This product is nimble enough that, now talking your talk when it comes to middle housing, courtyard cluster, when you go to the courtyard cluster, on a typical 50 by 120 site, this stuff is nimble enough that we can get the building up front, the second building, and then parking along a lane. So on a 6,000 square foot site, we're able to get 4 upper 3-bedroom units and 4 lower 1-bedroom suites.
So cool. Now that you've been on the front line, fighting the good fight, modular.
Yes.
The promise of modular, and you could correct me if I'm wrong, was always speed, first and foremost. Speed correlates to savings in cost, savings in time, and quicker having people into their home. I think from what I understand, and maybe you can brief us a bit on this, the speed is not in question in terms of your ability to produce, deliver, but you've hit some hurdles along the way in terms of speed. And so I guess my question to you is like speed and cost. Everyone always said it was much more expensive than conventional. What have your early initial findings at a high level been telling you, and what are some of the challenges that you've been facing to really implement the speed?
Well, and just to like set where we are, we're in this show home, which is just out the doors of ATCO Park in Calgary. This show home was then parlayed into 2 pilot developments, one in the northwest of Calgary, one in the southeast of Calgary. Those are both, we're working those through approvals right now.
Do you mind unpacking the unit counts on those or what they are?
In the northwest, we're looking at a 32 unit development, which would be comprised of 8 of these show homes, situated with surface parking, landscaping, like any other typical conventionally built stacked townhome development. In the southeast, we've got same thing, just 24 units in that circumstance. So those, as mentioned, are in approvals. When it comes to modular, for sure, we can do things faster. There's a couple important points, and when it gets to hitting those right costs and being competitive, for sure the speed always helps on a pro forma, and that's an asset. Consistency and certainty as well. When you're talking about manufacturing, no different than Henry Ford and a Ford production line. Once you get that up and running, you just want perpetuity and to keep things moving. So that will come as we organically grow. For sure, there are challenges. There's challenges in conventional construction. Construction is tough. There's a changing energy code, building code, differences in bylaws. You've got jurisdictional differences. So there's it's a tough gig conventionally or on the modular front. With modular being new and people suddenly starting to talk about things like CSA certification, A277 certification, those kind of things. It's new lingo in a lot of areas. It's been around for a long time, but for sure some of those hurdles are the faster you go. The world is predicated and set up for conventional timelines when it comes to construction. So the faster you go, it becomes tough when on development permit approvals, building permit approvals. You look at things like NMAX energization timelines are kind of predicated on a longer timeline. ATCO itself, when it comes to gas service, that's not easy either. So from an acceptance of modular construction and certification to approvals and systems and policy. And when I mention policy, even funding policy, you talk about someone like CMHC. In home space days, we would typically do a development and have a tranche at 30% completion, 60, 90, and then we would do an audit at the end and get that last 10%. The timeline here is very different, where we work on a site, we have a site ready, and then suddenly the buildings show up, and we go from 30% done to 90% done in a matter of a couple weeks. So it's all of those systems in conjunction, from municipal approvals to energization and servicing to finance policy and processes. The faster you go, the more difficult it becomes, and it's just going to be a nut that we're going to have to crack and work through, and it comes through from reps. These first 2 pilot developments, there's a lot of brain damage on that. I always call it like the bleeding edge of technology. You pioneer and force your way through that, and things become easier.
Yeah, I mean, innovation is always hard, and I think we're all grateful to have an organization like yours who's not only recognizing the power of the form, the need for the housing, and meeting the time and the moment now to come forward. It's frustrating for us to hear, all of the obstacles that you folks are facing, but I understand, because you're moving at a speed that no one in the system was aware you could move at. They all want us to move at that speed, but they don't realize the implications of what that means for how they have to move.
And no one out there wants the slow housing. No one wants to add to the housing crisis. But I mentioned conventionally built buildings have got their own challenges, and like you've had some brain damage when it comes to fire ratings, sprinklers,
Yeah.
firewalls, that kind of stuff. We've got the same hurdles on the modular front. It's minds need to get their heads around that process, CSA certification, and how all this hangs together. What I think we're looking really forward to at ATCO is working with groups like the City of Calgary to become that gold standard, with some big federal announcements on off-site construction, prefabricated construction, modular construction. You know, it's not like ATCO is the only modular player out there. There's other groups that have been doing it for a long time as well, that are excited, that are all muscling up. ATCO, we really would like to be the gold standard. And when it comes to modular development, when people step into this space, it would be groups like the City of Calgary, for example, turning and using ATCO as like the bar and an example of where you got to get to and what you know, how you need to perform if you want to make things work on a modular level.
Yeah, and I mean, like, you said it, you touched on it briefly. The federal government has kind of made some announcements which have really said, the feds have come in and told us that, you know, they believe this is a frontier of housing. As for us to meet the crisis, we're going to have to find ways to produce housing differently.
Yep.
You're here on the front lines even prior to that announcement, trying to make that work. And I think I was asking you this again off the camera. The amount of interest that you've had has really been to the, you know, you talked about the woman having lunch over at Blue Flame, all the way to the largest developer in the country. And so talk to me about that interest and how you guys are navigating all the government interest, all the different branches, and then how you continue to drive home your vision.
Yeah, I think there's like a culmination of a couple different storms, and not seeing it coming a year ago, an announcement like a $12 billion announcement to support these initiatives, for sure. That's a huge announcement, you know, and I've seen things like that make a difference in the past. Rapid housing is a great example, where you know, the parameters around obtaining that funding really suddenly in the market, you would see every hotelier in the City of Calgary, you know, thinking that that product could be converted to some sort of residential type product, and hotel prices in a short term kind of going up like a stock type thing. So funding announcements like that for sure make a difference. Something that else makes a big difference is, I think the last time I heard a stat like this rung out is for every 8 tradespeople that are leaving the industry, you got 1 coming in. So, you know, there's lineups at the door at a place like Triple M, for example, and instead of working in some adverse conditions, I always bring up the fact you think about a window installer up on some scaffolding in some minus 20-degree weather with some wind howling, you know, glue's not working ideally in those temperatures, and trying to, you know, get the details on a window installation
Waterproof
right.
it.
I'll tell you who's going to do that better is a person in a controlled environment in a factory where things get brought up to work height. They don't even have to bend over in a t-shirt with you know, gloves on. So I think there's a number of storms that are culminating at once, and one is a housing crisis, some announcements from the feds, and the fact that, you know, it's harder and harder to execute projects modularly or conventionally, just with demographic changes and that kind of thing. The goal of ATCO producing turnkey developments and selling those, out of the gates, we've got a ton of interest, and there's a wide spectrum on that. And you mentioned, yes, from people dining at the Blue Flame Kitchen, looking at the show home across the street, asking, hey, can I get one of these? I got a lot in the City of Calgary. Can I buy that from you? To, yes, some of the bigger land developers in the City of Calgary knocking on the door saying, hey, we've got some upcoming chunks of land that we're looking at development. You know, we're all ears on this modular front. So quite an array there. Also, we've got REITs, you know, private market investors that are looking at this, and then on the other side of the spectrum, back in my old stomping ground, when you talk about not-for-profit and that sort of thing, a ton of housing providers interested in this product as well. And you're right. it hasn't always been cheaper. It's been more expensive. We look to be toe in toe with conventional builders when it comes to costs. We just see ATCO and ourselves providing a much higher quality product. The precision, building envelopes, details being built in a manufactured environment rather than out on a site where you've got materials that are delivered, snowed on, rained on, framed up, snowed on, rained on, not always being constructed in the most ideal circumstances. See a ton of benefits and a bunch, like I said, a bunch of perfect storms kind of culminating at one time.
For you, and in the short amount of time that you've been here, but obviously every day been here, what do you think it's going to take, Matt, to unleash modular in a meaningful way? Like, obviously it makes up a small percentage of the construction housing environment. What, in your mind, what are some of the levers that you think are going to be critical for us to solve in order to actually allow for it to happen at a meaningful scale?
Not that modular hasn't been done before. There's modular developments that have just recently been executed in Calgary. There's been some challenges on those. And I think in a jurisdiction like Calgary, it's going to take some repetition. It's going to take proving out the model. It's going to take getting a level of comfort and understanding and confidence in modular process, the product that's produced, the fact that it meets fire life and safety and all of the rigor that conventional construction goes through. Modular still needs to meet that same bar. I think on the modular front, just the more reps, the better. The more familiarity that breeds. I think really we're interested in working in a number of different jurisdictions. I don't think, I know not all jurisdictions look at things the same way, interpret codes even differently within Alberta. Edmonton is doing some very different things than Calgary is doing. So we're interested in dipping our toes, and ATCO has got another ATCO-owned site in the city of Edmonton. We've met with them, and that municipality is excited and paving the way and would love to see an ATCO modular development up there. We're working on that right now. I think it's getting it out there. It's executing it. It's showing that someone can, just like you can walk through this show home and touch the walls and the countertops and stand in here and say, I had no idea that this would have been built in a factory compared to conventionally built. I think it's that same thing up a level when you've got people parking on a parking stall, getting out of a car and walking through a courtyard of a modular development, saying that this is beautiful. This does dispel the rumors that and the biases and the thoughts that we had about modular versus conventional construction, and we'll get there. We're months away from being at that point.
Yeah, I mean, I know we've talked about modular being done before, and it's been around for a long time, but I feel like you're on the cutting edge of innovation in a way that you're building the systems and processes that are required in order for us to meet the sheer demand of housing that we're talking about. And I think that's probably one of the biggest, most significant differences is how does the industry and how do folks around you, whether it be in the public sector or who play a role, meet ATCO and these modular providers where they need to be met in order to help support that ecosystem. And so again, sitting here with you now, it's every day it feels like it's closer and closer.
Yeah, it's funny. Some days it feels closer, and then next week it feels a little further away. But that's comes part and parcel with innovating, like you just mentioned, and we're excited. We've got these two developments that are in approvals right now. One is in the development permit stage. One we're just on the cusp of working through building permit. It was exciting to see Attainable Homes working with structures, getting that building permit in place, and it's coming. And it's old but new in a lot of ways, and I think. Just proving it out, executing and getting some projects in the ground that, like I said, people can touch and feel and walk through goes a long way.
Cool. Okay, thanks, Matt. Really appreciate your time, man, and looking forward to these first completed pilot projects and you guys continue to carve the way.
Yeah, we've always appreciated you, Al. You know, middle housing is certainly one of those keys to the solving the housing crisis. And you've got single-family homes, and you've got apartment buildings that are always going to be there, that are always going to do their thing. I think there's a lot of room for middle housing to step in and make a big dent in this issue. And ATCO is looking very, very forward to you know, being a pioneer like ATCO's been since you know, the 40s. Really pioneering this stacked townhome modular typology, and we'll be excited next time we sit down. You know, a couple months from now, we won't be in a show home. We'll be in a you know, a real world development that we'll be exceptionally proud to have executed and to get in the ground. So always appreciate you, Al, and thanks for your time and interest in that what ATCO's got up and running.
Cool.